The Ashwaubenon Village Board now moving forward with rules surrounding short-term rentals, many of which are near Lambeau Field. It unanimously voted tonight to adopt an ordinance amendment that puts a minimum stay on certain rentals. As we first alerted you on our Action 2 News app, this vote comes after resident complaints. Samantha Cavalli heard the arguments behind the change and also learns there is a way that rentals would be more accessible during the 2025 draft.
A minimum night stay requirement is coming to short-term rentals in Ashwaubenon. The Village Board Tuesday night voting unanimously on an ordinance amendment to require a minimum 6-night, 7-day stay at non-owner occupied licensed 1 and 2 family rental units. Owner-occupied short-term rental units that are licensed by the village would not be subject to the minimum stay requirement.
Based on my observation, what I've heard, the overwhelming opinions in the committee meetings were against the proposal, and the board appears to be in a position that they want to restrict the number of short-term rentals in the village.
To try to find a solution to please everyone, the ordinance is also not applicable to any short-term rental licenses for single-family and two-family homes during the licensing period between July 1st, 2022 and June 30th, 2023, for a period of 1 year or until July 1st, 2024.
Find a solution that works for everybody. And grandfathering in all this time, money that's been invested into these businesses, grandfather them in properly.
The village president said as of Tuesday, there are 70 short-term rental units in Ashwaubenon, and that number will grow. She said while short-term rentals may be 1% of the village's housing, it's over 7% of the housing directly south of Lambeau Field. She said the board's hands are tied due to Wisconsin Act 59, which limits how municipalities can regulate short-term rental licensing based on zoning.
Unfortunately, the state law does not leave us with a lot of options. We would love to put a compass around Lambeau Field and say this is the only place that you can do this. We can't. So your beat, as far as a short-term rental, is really with the state legislature, not us.
One trustee said those who opposed the amendment and showed up to the meeting don't have all the information they have from residents who have complained to them.
And so you're saying everybody who's coming, we've heard them object to it. But what you're not seeing is the emails and the phone calls and the personal contacts that we're all getting from residents of Ashwaubenon saying.
Following the announcement of the 2025 NFL Draft coming to Green Bay, the village can by resolution ordinance temporarily suspend provisions of the code to accommodate this extraordinary circumstance. The ordinance amendment will go into effect July 1st. Samantha Cavalli, Action 2 News, Ashwaubenon.